Now to a highlight of this year's conference, the session entitled Putting the 2012 Election into Historical Context.
What we're doing here today is we're trying to figure out how asking historical questions, how thinking historically gives us a different take, a different perspective on a presidential election. Not necessarily this presidential election, but any presidential election, any important political event. And I think what you saw is four historians who think in different ways, who have different ways of understanding how change happens. Asking different kinds of questions and trying to understand that change. Once you put a presidential election on the table, you're going to open up all kinds of aspects of American politics, society, and culture. And so our conversation veered across such topics as voter suppression, taxation, foreign policy, religion in the United States, the extent to which Muslims are or are not becoming more or less accepted as part of American culture. So you see the ways in which a presidential election opens all kinds of questions for people to be asking.
I loved Mary Frances Berry's discussion of a kind of routine voter suppression that goes on, at the everyday level in all kinds of local and state elections that we don't think about. And that was a really good reminder that this is something that's an issue in American politics even when it doesn't come up in a big presidential election.
I think the most surprising thing was the commonality of thought process about the election, that in fact the election was less close than people thought. They cited Nate Silver in 538 in his polling context of this really wasn't a close race after all. And I think there was general unanimity, even though some people might have disagreed philosophically with that in point of fact it was a mid-range election and not really that close.
In most academic settings, you actually don't hear a lot of Republicans, so it was interesting to have some debate and discussion between people coming from a more liberal perspective and also hearing from a couple of Republicans. So that was probably, especially for me coming from a very blue state, it was good to hear, at least get a little bit of other perspective.
One of the more interesting things to me was how presidential candidates and then presidential terms get trapped by their predecessors' actions. There was a great deal of commentary about campaign rhetoric, particularly on the war on terror and the changes that candidate Obama, then President Obama, and secondarily the re-election of President Obama, nothing has changed, that the war on terror continues on and that one can't make change within the war on terror because then you would get accused of having made a mistake, and how could you do so? So that was a very interesting point about how presidents get trapped in policy debates that may in fact be against where they wanted to go.
I'm hoping that people walk away thinking that there are different ways of understanding how political change happens, and that there are different ways of understanding people who run for president by thinking about them in the context of social movements, in the context of earlier presidents. We had 13 presidents, former presidents named in this panel, which tells you the extent to which our panelists were drawing on the past, drawing not only on parallels but differences in the past, and trying to go beyond the old saw about if you don't understand history, you're bound to repeat it, which we all know in fact is not true. If you don't understand history, you're not going to understand how to make change happen in the future, is what they were trying to explain.